On a quiet street, the flickering light from the street lamps cast shadows over the cracks on the worn-out sidewalk. Julian Kingsley, heir to the company, stepped out of his expensive car with a flat tire. He ran his hand through his neatly styled brown hair, trying to stifle a frustrated sigh. All he wanted was a moment of peace after days filled with the pressure of endless meetings and enormous figures. Just perfect, he muttered, irritably loosening his expensive tie. Julian was the epitome of a successful man, with everything anyone could dream of: a multi-million-dollar company, captivating looks, and influential connections. Yet behind the perfect facade lay a restless soul. Having lost his parents at a young age and shouldering the family legacy early, Julian was haunted by the fragility of life and the loneliness that surrounded him. Success and wealth could never fill the void in his heart. As he was considering calling for roadside assistance, a figure emerged from the darkness, causing him to step back in alarm, his hand gripping his phone in his jacket pocket with caution. The figure moved closer, revealing a young woman with dirty blonde hair tied up in a messy bun. Her old, worn clothes hung loosely on her thin frame, but there was a spark in her sharp blue eyes that captured Julian's attention. "Car trouble?" she asked, her voice ringing out like a gentle melody. Julian hesitated, then nodded. "Flat tire," he replied warily. The girl gave a small, faint smile, and her thin lips curled slightly. "Mind if I take a look? I used to work at a garage." Curious and with no better option, Julian gestured toward his expensive car. "Go ahead." She knelt beside the tire, her calloused hands moving with a rare grace and efficiency. After a few minutes, she stood up, brushing her hands on her old pants. "Done," she said, a soft smile on her lips. "It should hold until you get it to a workshop." Julian was momentarily at a loss. "Thank you," he managed after a pause, then asked, "What's your name?" "Ivy," she replied, her gaze wary. "And you?" "Julian Kingsley," he introduced himself, his instinctive politeness making him extend his hand. Ivy hesitated for a moment before shaking it. Their hands were starkly different. His was soft and well cared for, while hers was rough and worn. An awkward silence settled between them. Julian uneasily opened his wallet. "Let me pay you for your help." "No need," Ivy interrupted, her voice carrying a hint of pride. "I didn't do it for money." Julian frowned, surprised. A girl living on the streets refusing money? A wild idea began to form in his mind. "Perhaps I have another way to repay you," he said slowly. Ivy crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze cold. "What way?" Julian took a deep breath. "I need someone to accompany me to a charity event tonight. Pretend to be my girlfriend." Ivy let out a bitter laugh. "Are you serious? Look at me. I'm hardly millionaire girlfriend material." "That's exactly why you'll be perfect," Julian insisted, his enthusiasm growing. "I need to make an impression on the people there. Show them I'm not just some rich guy throwing money around to look virtuous." Ivy studied him for a long moment, her sharp blue eyes seeming to read his soul. "And what do I get out of this?" $5,000, Julian offered, "and you can keep the dress and accessories for tonight." Ivy's eyes widened in shock. She fell silent, her face torn with conflicting emotions. Ivy was not an ordinary girl. Before becoming homeless, she had been the cherished daughter of a wealthy family. Her parents, successful entrepreneurs, had raised her with love and high expectations. She had been a brilliant student, beautiful and full of potential, dreaming of becoming a renowned architect. But life doesn't always go as planned. When her parents died in an accident, she was pulled into a whirlwind of debt and lost everything. Before long, Ivy was swept into a life of homelessness, struggling day by day to survive. Finally, she spoke. 10,000, she said firmly, "and I want half up front." Julian couldn't help but smile. "Deal?" He held out his hand. "Do we have an agreement?" Ivy looked at his outstretched hand, then into Julian's eyes. "You realize how crazy this is, right?" Julian shrugged. "Sometimes the craziest decisions are the best ones." She sighed, finally taking his hand. "All right, Mr. Kingsley, you have yourself a fake girlfriend for one night." Neither of them could have predicted that this arrangement would change their lives forever. Julian opened the car door for Ivy, and the two of them embarked on an unexpected journey. If you enjoy this story and want to follow more touching tales, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on our channel. The luxury car pulled up in front of a high-end fashion boutique. Bright lights gleamed, reflecting off the glass windows that displayed glittering evening gowns. Ivy hesitated as she stepped out of the car, her eyes filled with confusion and a touch of apprehension. Once when her parents were alive, places like this had been familiar. Her family had enjoyed extravagant shopping trips to such upscale stores. Those memories now felt like a shimmering but painful past. Ivy had once worn expensive gowns and attended lavish parties with her parents. But that was before her world was turned upside down, before the accident stole her family and left her homeless, struggling every day to find food. Now the cost of one of those dresses could sustain her on the streets for an entire month. Julian placed a hand on her back, gently pulling her away from the stream of painful memories. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft yet steady. Ivy nodded, forcing herself to step into the store. "I'm fine," she said, though the feeling of not belonging here clung to her. A saleswoman in a sleek suit quickly approached to greet them. Despite her brief look of surprise at Ivy's appearance, she kept her professional smile upon recognizing Julian. "Good evening, sir," the woman said in a sweet voice. "We're delighted to assist you." "We need an evening gown," Julian said, offering a confident yet polite smile. "Something stunning, but not too extravagant." The woman glanced at Ivy, clearly assessing her from head to toe, but swiftly masked her initial surprise. "Right this way," she invited, leading them to the fitting area where the most elegant gowns were displayed in a dazzling array. Ivy bit her lip, her throat tightening as she took in the sight of the expensive dresses hanging on the racks. She couldn't stop herself from thinking about her old life, about those happy days when she and her mother would pick out dresses for charity galas and important events her family used to attend. "You'll need your hair and makeup done," Julian said, his eyes attentively watching Ivy's expression. "And maybe a bit of a wash, too." Ivy blinked, confused. "A wash?" Julian chuckled lightly. "No offense, but you did just change my tire, and you're covered in dust." Ivy pressed her lips together, but then nodded slightly. Despite feeling judged, she knew Julian was right. Soon, a team of staff members guided her into an in-store spa. Ivy was led to a luxurious bathing area, complete with a large marble tub and soft, pristine white towels. Warm water surrounded her body, washing away the grime and fatigue from days spent surviving on the streets. When her dusty hair was washed clean and dried into soft golden waves, Ivy felt a part of herself being revived. It had been so long since she had experienced such comfort. After a facial treatment, Ivy could barely recognize herself in the mirror. Then came the gowns. Each time she stepped out of the fitting room, Ivy felt like a different person. But the final time, when she emerged in a sapphire evening gown, everything seemed to come to a halt. The dress hugged her figure, accentuating her gentle curves and making her deep blue eyes shine. Her golden hair was brushed smooth, cascading softly over her shoulders. Julian stood frozen, his eyes widening. For a moment, he was speechless. "Perfect," he whispered, his voice slightly shaky. Ivy looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her seemed unfamiliar, yet there was still a part of herself in the reflection, a blend of beauty and strength, of pain and hope. But she also knew this was just a temporary illusion. When the night ended, she would return to her harsh reality. "You look beautiful," Julian said, his eyes filled with admiration, and something else that Ivy couldn't bring herself to believe was real. Ivy's heart beat faster, but she reminded herself that this was just a deal, a role to play, nothing more. "Shall we go?" Ivy asked, forcing a smile to hide her unease. Julian smiled, extending his hand. "Let's. Let the evening begin." The luxury car pulled up in front of a grand hotel, where one of the city's most extravagant charity events was taking place. The hotel lobby sparkled with crystal chandeliers, and the city's most powerful and wealthy gathered to support the Future Hope Foundation, a charity dedicated to funding educational programs and job opportunities for underprivileged children. The event was not just a fundraiser, but an opportunity for business people and investors to network and discuss important deals. Julian Kingsley had to attend not just out of a sense of duty, but for strategic reasons. He was in the middle of negotiating a major deal with a group of influential investors who could decide the future of the company. After a few years marred by damaging rumors about his family, Julian needed to reaffirm his image, not just as a wealthy businessman, but as someone with a warm heart who cared about the community. However, what worried Julian wasn't just the business deal. Recently, his associates had begun to question his personal life. Rumors about his coldness and lack of connection to those around him had made his image seem rigid and detached. That was why Julian had decided to hire Ivy as his date for the night. The presence of a young woman with natural beauty and simplicity would create the impression that he cared for more than just wealth and status. Julian stepped out of the car, adjusted his suit, and extended his hand to help Ivy. She took his hand, her palm slightly trembling. The unfamiliar feeling of stepping into the world of the wealthy made her want to run away. But she pushed the feeling down, remembering the money that would help her survive for several more months. "Remember," Julian whispered as they stepped into the lobby, where the light from the chandeliers shimmered on the marble floors. "Tonight, you're my girlfriend. Just play the part." Ivy took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had survived the hardest days of her life, so how could a fancy gala possibly faze her? "Julian, my old friend," a warm, friendly voice called out. A middle-aged man with graying hair and a kindly smile approached. It was David, the event organizer and one of the longtime business partners of Julian's family. "I didn't think you'd make it tonight. And who is this?" He looked at Ivy, curiosity in his eyes but not lacking in politeness. "This is Ivy, my girlfriend," Julian introduced her confidently, a charming smile on his face. "Ivy, this is David, a close friend of my family." "Nice to meet you, Mr. David," Ivy said, trying to sound natural. She extended her hand, and David courteously bowed and kissed it lightly. "A pleasure, Miss Ivy," David said, his eyes showing a hint of surprise but quickly softening into a smile. "I hope you both have a wonderful evening. Enjoy yourselves." As David walked away, Julian turned to Ivy. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes full of concern. Ivy let out a small sigh, a smile breaking onto her lips. "I'm fine, it's just strange being here." Julian smiled. "You're doing great." As Ivy and Julian were conversing with other guests, a sweet yet cold voice echoed from behind them. "Julian," the voice said, laden with subtle implication. They both turned, and Ivy saw a striking woman in a vibrant red dress approaching. It was Nora Beaumont. Nora wasn't just an old acquaintance of Julian's. She was the only daughter of one of the major investors in the company. Her wealth and power made her a significant figure in the high society circles. But more notably, she had once harbored an unrequited affection for Julian, who had never reciprocated her feelings. Nora had always believed Julian was her perfect match, and she refused to accept anyone else getting in the way. She was known to be cunning and manipulative. Nora stared at Ivy, her gaze icy. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your new girlfriend?" she asked, her lips curving into an unfriendly smile. Julian stiffened but kept his voice calm. "Nora, this is Ivy, my girlfriend." He turned to Ivy, adding, "Ivy, this is Nora Beaumont, an old friend." Nora tilted her head, her sharp eyes never leaving Ivy. "Nice to meet you, Ivy," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Julian has never mentioned you before. I suppose your relationship is new?" Ivy fought to stay composed, returning Nora's gaze with a steady smile. "Yes, but it's very meaningful." Nora's smile turned frosty. "How interesting." Then she turned to Julian. "Julian, you know, some of the investors are quite eager to meet with you. They've been talking about your new development project and are curious about your stability." Julian knew exactly what Nora was insinuating. Any rumors of deception in his personal life, such as hiring Ivy to be his pretend girlfriend, could ruin the image he had worked so hard to build. It wouldn't just jeopardize his career, but also risk the family company losing the trust of its investors. Nora wanted to expose the truth not just out of jealousy. She knew that if Julian's reputation were destroyed, her father and other investors would look for someone else to trust. She also couldn't stand the idea that Julian had chosen someone else over her, especially someone who didn't seem to belong in high society. She wanted to prove that Julian was unworthy and that she, the perfect woman from an illustrious lineage, was his rightful match. Nora gave a smug smile, her eyes full of challenge. "We'll talk later, Julian," she said before walking away, leaving a tense atmosphere behind. The air in the room grew stifling after Nora's departure. Julian stood motionless, his hands clenched, while Ivy could feel the tension radiating from him with every breath. She knew they had entered a game where their opponent wasn't just the curious eyes of the guests, but a powerful and calculating woman. Julian turned to Ivy, his face weary but his eyes resolute. "You did great," he said quietly but sincerely. "But we need to be careful. Nora isn't someone to be underestimated." Ivy nodded, trying to remain calm. She had faced much harsher things before, but this time there was a different kind of fear gnawing at her, not for herself, but for Julian. She didn't understand why she cared about him so much, but she knew he was standing at the edge of losing everything. Julian led Ivy through the grand hall, where guests laughed and toasted to the generous donations. He stopped at a quiet corner and turned to her. "Ivy," he said, his brown eyes full of turmoil, "I'm sorry for dragging you into this, but if you want to leave now, I'll understand." Ivy looked at him for a long moment, the light in her eyes reflecting the resilience she had honed over years of hardship. "Do you think I came this far just to give up?" she said, her voice strong with a touch of humor. "We made a deal, and I still need to get that $10,000. Julian couldn't help but smile at her humor. "Thank you," he whispered. From a distance, Nora's sharp eyes never left them. She stood there, a threatening shadow, observing Ivy and Julian's every move. Nora knew that if she could find proof of Julian hiring Ivy as a fake girlfriend, she would have the perfect weapon to ruin him. It would not only strip him of the investor's trust, but also leave Julian facing personal and professional ruin. It was a blow the company wouldn't be able to recover from. After a few guests came by to greet and compliment Ivy on her grace, Julian and Ivy quietly left the heart of the party. They stepped out onto the grand balcony of the hotel, where the cool breeze swept over them, offering a rare moment of calm in the otherwise suffocating atmosphere inside. Ivy placed her hands on the railing, gazing at the star-filled sky. Memories of the past came rushing back, of evenings when she and her parents would enjoy nights like these, with no worries other than choosing the perfect gown for the next gala. The feeling of loss and injustice she had endured surged through her like a crashing wave. Julian stood beside her, silently watching. "You used to be familiar with places like this, didn't you?" he asked, as if he could read her thoughts. Ivy nodded, her eyes still fixed on the night sky. "I once had everything," she said, her voice soft but tinged with bitterness. "I lived in a world of luxury where money was never a problem. But then, everything vanished overnight. I had to learn to live differently." Julian remained silent, his eyes becoming more contemplative. "I lost everything too," he admitted. "My parents passed away when I was very young, and this company is all I have left to remember them by. I always thought that if I did everything I could to protect their legacy, I would no longer feel the emptiness. But sometimes, money and success just aren't enough to fill that void." Ivy turned to look at him, surprised by his honesty. "Then why go through the trouble of deceiving everyone?" she asked. "You don't have to do this to prove anything." Julian gave a sad smile. "The world isn't that simple. Investors don't care if I'm lonely or not. They just need to see that I'm stable enough to trust. And if Nora finds out the truth about us, I won't just lose my image. I'll lose everything I've fought to protect." Ivy fell silent, feeling the weight of his words. She understood that even though Julian was a millionaire, his fear of losing the things he held most dear was just like the fear she had experienced. And here they were, two people from different worlds, both fighting for things they couldn't bear to lose. The auction went smoothly, with extraordinary sums being offered for luxurious items. Everyone in the hall watched intently, and Julian continuously bid on the most expensive pieces, giving the impression of a generous man who wasn't just wealthy, but truly cared about charitable causes. Ivy stood beside him, trying to appear composed, but inside she felt a suffocating tension. Meanwhile, Nora, with a calculating smile, observed from a distance. She realized that exposing Julian wasn't just a personal vendetta. If she could destroy Julian's credibility in front of the investors, she would exact her revenge and clear the path for her father and others to take over the major projects Julian was pursuing. Nora's scheming never ceased. When the auction concluded, Julian and Ivy were invited onto the stage to thank the generous attendees. Julian held the microphone, his polite yet strained smile visible. I want to sincerely thank all of you for contributing to the Future Hope Foundation. Your donations will help us transform the lives of children in need, giving them the chance for a brighter future. As Julian finished speaking, applause erupted across the hall. Ivy stood beside him, smiling, but she couldn't shake the lingering sense of unease. The moment they stepped off the stage, Nora approached them, holding a glass of red wine in her hand, her eyes sharp and a self-satisfied smile playing on her lips. Julian, she said, her voice sugary but laced with sarcasm, your speech was wonderful, but I couldn't help but wonder about your new girlfriend. Ivy, isn't it? Ivy turned to face Nora, feeling the palpable tension in the air. Yes, she replied, doing her best to keep her voice calm. Nora stepped closer, standing just a breath away. How interesting. I've heard a lot about you, Julian, but I never thought your taste would change so drastically. Julian clenched his jaw, striving to remain calm. My taste isn't any of your concern, Nora, he said, his voice turning cold. Nora raised an eyebrow but then relaxed, letting out a light laugh. Oh, perhaps not. But if you don't mind, I have a small question. Did you just meet Ivy recently, or has she been by your side for a long time? Julian could sense the threat underlying her words. He knew Nora was trying to sow doubt, and that made him even more uneasy. But before he could respond, Ivy unexpectedly spoke up. We met under circumstances that aren't like the fairy tale love stories you might imagine, Ivy said, meeting Nora's gaze unflinchingly. But that doesn't make our relationship any less important. Sometimes the most unexpected things create the truest connections. Nora paused, clearly taken aback that Ivy would confront her so directly, but she quickly regained her composure, smiling faintly. Really? I love unexpected stories, she said, a dangerous glint in her eyes. But I always enjoy uncovering the truths behind those surprises. Julian gently squeezed Ivy's hand, signaling her not to say more. Thank you for your concern, Nora, he said, his voice composed but firm. But now, if you'll excuse us, I need to spend time with my girlfriend. Nora simply smiled, taking a step back. Of course. Have a wonderful evening, you two. As Nora walked away, Julian let out a heavy sigh. She won't stop, he said, his voice low enough for only Ivy to hear. Nora will keep trying to expose us. Ivy felt a knot of discomfort tightening in her chest. She didn't want Julian to suffer, but she couldn't help wondering how she had gotten herself into this situation. Yet deep down, she knew she couldn't abandon him. Julian had brought her into this game, but now she felt she had to fight for both of them. We'll find a way, Ivy said, her voice resolute. Both of us. Julian looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his expression. In that moment, he realized that Ivy's presence had given him more than just a fabricated shield. It had brought him something genuinely meaningful. But would that bond be strong enough to withstand Nora's schemes and the truth that loomed just around the corner? The charity auction concluded successfully, with millions of dollars raised for the Future Hope Foundation. Julian and Ivy had managed to pull through, but both knew that this victory was only on the surface. Don't forget to subscribe to follow more meaningful stories. Nora didn't give up after the auction. She immediately hired a private investigator to dig deep into Ivy's past, focusing particularly on her time living on the streets. Nora wanted to unearth any detail that could expose Julian and Ivy's fake relationship and tarnish Ivy's reputation, thereby damaging Julian's image. She only needed to uncover one small mistake to have the perfect weapon to ruin them. The relationship between Julian and Ivy didn't stop there. They often talked and confided in each other about life, two wounded souls finding solace in one another. A few days after the auction, Julian and Ivy began receiving threatening messages. One afternoon, while Julian was working at his office, his phone rang. Nora's sweet but cutting voice echoed through the line. Julian, I hope you're doing well, she said, her tone like a blade. I thought you'd like to know that I've discovered some interesting things about your little girlfriend. Julian clenched his jaw, his hand tightening around the phone. Nora, what do you want? Nora laughed. It's simple. I want you to end this charade immediately and publicly admit that you staged your relationship to gain favor with the investors. If you don't, I'll reveal everything I know about your fake relationship and about Ivy, including her troubled past. Julian felt his heart constrict. He knew that if Nora exposed any information about Ivy, not only would his reputation be ruined, but Ivy's life would also be destroyed. The thought of the woman he had grown deeply fond of suffering even more was something he couldn't bear. That evening, Julian invited Ivy to his apartment. They sat together in the living room, the city lights twinkling through the window. Ivy sat silently, her blue eyes darkened with worry as she listened to Julian recount what Nora had said. She won't stop, Julian said, his voice full of helplessness. She's dug into your past. She knows about it, and she's threatening to use it to destroy us both. Ivy froze, a wave of fear crashing over her. She was used to facing life's harshness, but this time, the pain came not only from the threat, but from the thought that Julian was also suffering because of her. We can't let her win, Ivy whispered, her eyes welling up. I don't want you to lose everything because of me. Julian turned to her, his eyes gentle but resolute. Ivy, you are not a burden. You've brought more meaning to my life than anything else. We'll find a way out of this. Together. Julian and Ivy knew they had to confront Nora before she could cause more damage. They needed a plan to dismantle her scheme and turn the tables. We have to take control of the narrative, Julian said, his voice determined. If we come forward first and tell the truth about how we met and the real reason behind our arrangement, Nora will have nothing to attack us with. But what about the investors? Ivy asked anxiously. Julian gripped her hand firmly. We'll do it in a way that no one can deny. They need to see that this isn't just a fake relationship, but a story about two people who found each other in the most unexpected circumstances. Together, they wrote an open letter, sharing their entire story, from Julian's desperation to save his reputation to Ivy's decision to take part for financial survival, and how a genuine bond had formed between them. They wanted to show that sometimes, from calculated agreements, real and meaningful connections could arise, and there was nothing wrong with that. A few days later, as Nora continued to threaten them, Julian and Ivy decided to act. They held a press conference about their charitable projects in front of investors and the press. When Nora found out about it, she prepared all the evidence she could to expose Julian and Ivy's relationship at the event. Julian stepped onto the stage, holding Ivy's hand tightly. In front of the journalists and investors, he began to speak. Before we discuss the charitable projects, there's something I need to address. I know there have been rumors about my relationship with Ivy, Julian said, his voice steady and full of resolve. And today, I want to share the whole truth. We met under circumstances that are far from a fairy tale romance. And yes, at first it was a calculated agreement, but things changed. Ivy didn't just help me make an impression. She taught me what it means to be genuine, to be brave, and to live authentically. Ivy continued, her eyes shimmering with determination. I am not perfect. I have a complicated past and have faced some terrible things. But it was through those hardships that I found the strength to rise. And when I met Julian, I never expected to find someone I truly cared about. Their sincere words left the crowd in silence. No one could deny the honesty in their story, and even the most skeptical investors were moved. Nora, standing in the back, was frozen in disbelief. She couldn't believe her plan had failed so miserably. She hadn't counted on the power of sincerity and the courage of two people she had underestimated. After the press conference, Julian and Ivy confronted Nora. You've lost, Julian said, his voice calm but firm. You can keep trying to tear us down, but now everyone knows the truth, and they stand with us. Nora could do nothing but retreat, bitter and defeated. With Nora's scheme dismantled, Julian and Ivy could finally breathe a sigh of relief. They knew the road ahead would still be full of challenges, but they also knew that together they could face anything. Two lonely souls had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and it had changed everything. Julian held Ivy close, feeling his heart race, not just from relief, but from a love that was growing stronger. We'll make it, he whispered, a gentle smile on his lips. No matter what happens, I'll always be here with you. Ivy smiled back, her eyes glowing with happiness. And I'll be here with you too. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more video.